Welcome to Hope, a channel to highlight stories where it's clear to see where sin abounded, grace abounds more. Check out today's episode.
Hey, I'm Gutierrez, or Niko Gutierrez. So I am 40 years old, and I'm from San Antonio, Texas. Live there now. I have 4 children. My oldest is in the military, 2 in high school, 1 in middle school. I work in food manufacturing as a maintenance mechanic. I'm a member of San Antonio Reformed Church. And so I've been back home in San Antonio. I was living in Fort Worth for a little over 3 years, almost 4 years, coming out of prison. And then I went back home about 10 months ago. So I've been in prison 3 times, and I've been to jail a bunch of times. So the last time I was incarcerated, I had an issue where I was in an altercation. And so I was still in the Bexar County Jail, and they put me on, they locked me up in the 6th floor. If anybody knows about the Bexar County Jail, it's called BJ, the name of the pod. Well, on the 6th floor, on my radio, I could pick up the AM stations that would share the gospel or preach, the preaching stations or whatever, radio ministries. Well, I came across this teacher named John MacArthur. And he was doing a series called Living Real on Romans chapter 12. And this is when I believe I experienced my conversion. If you would have asked me before that, I would have told you I was a Christian. I was raised Roman Catholic. I went to charismatic churches occasionally here and there. You know, I'd even spoken tongues before and got slain in the spirit and all that stuff. But of course, I still lived a crazy life, and ended up getting back locked up. Well, then I heard experienced John MacArthur preaching the gospel. And I just, at that time, I was like, man, I've never heard this before. And then, so I wanted to hear the next day. And like, by the middle of that series that he was teaching off of, I just broke down, man. And I was like, man, I don't know you, God. I've never known you, Christ. And I can say from that time period there, my life's never been the same. Like I've been changed. I mean, it hasn't all been roses. Like I still struggle now, but I'm just not the same person anymore. And so like people who know me from back in the day, like can't believe I am who I am now. And people who know me now, if I tell them how I was before then, they can't believe it. They're like, you weren't like that. I was like, and I think that's just a testimony to how much I have changed, to the way I used to live and to the way I live now. That was my conversion experience. I can't say a day, or it was just during that time period that I spent put away in the county jail. And then I ended up going to prison. I did about 8 years the last time. And it just blossomed from there. It wasn't all pretty. I still got in some trouble, I still did things I'm not proud of, but I definitely wasn't the same, it wasn't the same as before. So that's how I came to Christ. Before I had all these issues with drugs and alcohol, and I'm sober. When I see people struggling now with substance abuse, and I just like, I can say I don't have a desire for it anymore. And I can say that God, he has taken that desire from me, and there's no other explanation because like I said, I started doing drugs. I was smoking weed every day when I was in 5th grade, and then middle school, I was already drinking. I was already doing cocaine, taking pills. And so, like I said, I've been incarcerated several times, been in rehab. And so I had tried everything, and I tried to change a bunch of times, and I could never change, and I could never stop using drugs or anything. And then, but now I've been sober for 12 years already, not even a drop of alcohol, not even a tobacco, nothing. And I know sometimes people were like, oh, well, you're incarcerated for 8. And I mean, anybody who's been incarcerated knows that, drugs are easily accessible. You can get anything in there that you can out here. So I would say that Jesus has made me sober. He's made me responsible. I've held a job since I've been home. I care about my children. I take care of them. And I'm in their lives, when I wasn't before, I pretty much a 180 from the way I used to live, where I would run the streets and I would gang bang and rob and do all those types of things. I don't want to do any of that stuff anymore. So I heard about Hope Prison Ministries from Chandler. Used to go preach at our unit. So I was already like kind of studying Reformed theology, and we all knew that Chandler was Reformed. And then I think it was Justin Bailey, somebody who was here before. He was the first one that I knew that got help through Hope, and then several other men after that, Jeff O'Keefe and Ronnie Mades. And of course I was in contact with them. And then I started corresponding. Chandler, we started corresponding, and he hooked up his phone, and we used to talk on the phone. That was when he was still driving the truck. And so he would be out on the road, and I'd be talking to him, and we'll correspond. He'll send me books, and I'll write book reports. I did the application process, et cetera. And then he gave me an opportunity to come over here. Coming to Fort Worth and just getting away from San Antonio, for a while, I felt like was a necessity. It was a sacrifice, like when I first told my family that my plans were to come over here. They didn't understand, some of them were upset. And, why would I, because I just had to do something different. Something I felt like was a bit extreme. And so, yeah, Hope, when I got out, like I said, a lot of the guys were already in Hope that I knew. And so they helped me transition. And then, of course, having things that were necessities already at hand when I got out, like just like a warm place, a bed and clothing and, boxers and things you don't really think about, like blankets and groceries and a phone and all those types of things, even getting the bus pass, things like that really, really helped me.
What did you like or not like about the way Hope Prison Ministries does things?
So I guess I'll start with what I liked. And I guess that would be the community, which would be the people, and just being around everyone. A lot of people facing the same circumstances, challenges, struggles, all those different types of things. You have that in common. And so you're not dealing with it alone, and so that was always good. And then having church and, pretty much the same idea, just the body of Christ, community around you, all those different types of things. And, even making connections through that, in fact, that's how I got my first job at Tyson as a mechanic. And I just took off from there. And one of the things maybe that I didn't like was maybe the same idea about people, but on the other end, like, where we have flaws. In my eyes, the way I saw it, like some people running game on Chandler, you know what I'm saying? Knowing that your intentions, your motives aren't really, what you make them out to be,
If you're liking this content, please help us grow. Like, subscribe, and let's keep the good times rolling. Now back to the episode.
I just want to share a little bit more about my testimony. And so if this message were to get shown to people incarcerated, just to give a little background, I was raised in the streets of San Antonio. I joined a gang early. So we, there's that whole aspect where we were banging, different gangs, going to war with each other, et cetera. But also like a big part of my testimony is like doing robberies. That was my career, quote unquote. Like I was they say a jack boy. I was a jack boy. And so I was running around like doing armed robbery, robbing drug dealers, that was my main form of hustle. But I would say like there's this whole street life, this whole street mentality that people have where like, a code of silence and, it's pretty much demonic. It's pretty much the opposite of everything that God says. But my message would be that there is hope, there's hope to come out of that. Don't think that you're ever too far gone, like to come to God or to come to Christ, or like, like Paul was a murderer. Paul murdered people. The Bible's full of flawed people. David was an adulterer. You see all kind of things in the Bible. People did that were wicked, and God still used them. All kinds of sexual sins, murder, just everything. Don't ever feel like you're too far gone to come to Christ. And even with in our mentality out here, being in the street, we're just like so puffed up, like, oh, I'm stiff, I'm hard, but in reality, like it's not real, because I've seen people throw their lives away just to be stiff or just to be hard. But if he can save me, if he can change me from the way I was, like running in people's houses and running in stores, like on a drop of a dime with a pistol and, give it up, or shooting people, me and my friends joking about it, like the people who we shot and all that type of stuff. But if he can take that, change me from that to who I am today, I know that he can pretty much, he can work on anyone.
The Doctrines of Grace, Reformed Theology. What's the story behind you coming to that position?
I think it was all providential, meaning that God, I can look back and see how he was pushed me towards that way all the time. Like John MacArthur. I used to hear about the MacArthur study Bible all the time. I was like, man, I want a MacArthur study Bible. Well, one day when I had just got to prison, my first year in prison, coming from county to prison, I remember it was Christmas and I led the Bible study, and a lot of people were charismatic. Well, I had been listening to John MacArthur, and some of the terms I mentioned and stuff, one guy told me, like, man, sound like you just read it out your study Bible. And I was like, man, I don't even have a study Bible. He's like, you don't have a study Bible, brother? He's like, I got an extra one. I'm gonna give it to you. Man, I'm telling you, man, this man brought out a John MacArthur study Bible. And I had been praying for one, man, and I swear, man, I cried. I was like, man, like, this is crazy. Like, I can't believe, just seeing God work. And then, so fast forward a little bit, I got into trouble. I got into some trouble and I moved. So they moved me. I got locked up for a little while. So, oh no, what happened first, before I got moved, this guy, he told me about Calvinism. We're talking, I was like, these people, they talk about prosperity gospel and all that. And so he's like, yeah, he's like, I'm glad he recognized that. This dude had done a lot of time. He was very knowledgeable of the Bible. He was getting ready to go home. And then I said, hey man, you ever heard of John MacArthur? He's like, yeah. He said, I'm gonna tell you why a lot of people don't know, why a lot of people don't like John MacArthur. And I was like, why? He was like, because he's a Calvinist. And I was like, what's a Calvinist? And then he was like, just keep studying. You're smart. You're gonna find out. And then so I was like, all right. So now fast forward, I got into trouble, got moved, and then this guy was telling me about this class they had at the unit over there, and called Essential Truths. And he's like, I had to get out of the class. And I was like, why'd you get out, man? And he's like, because they teach Calvinism. I was like, I still didn't know what Calvinism was, but I was like, oh, I need to be in that class. Like, he's like, you want to be in that? I was like, yeah, man, how can I get in there? So the next day, the pastor who would sit in on the class, a volunteer, his name was Terry Hubby, he was preaching the next Sunday morning, which was the following day. He's like, come on, I'm going to introduce you to Terry. So Terry Hubby, hey, I want to be in your class. Man, okay, next week you'll be in there. Got a lay-in to go. And then I just, just from there, just hit the book. The class was by a book by R.C. Sproul called Essential Truths of the Christian Faith. And then it just took off. But I will say, to this day, the one doctrine that convinced me the most about Calvinism is total depravity. Because without a doubt, I mean, I've lived it, and I know, total depravity, saying that every part of us is evil, we're not as bad as we can be, but we're corrupted in our thoughts and our motives and everything. And so I think that if anyone does an honest examination of themselves, they experience it, that you can say like, man, I'm out of there, and I know I was out of there, I know the stuff I've done, and so I think that was the most convincing for me. And then later on, just looking at other ideas of man, of anthropology, like humanistic thoughts where everything you have is good within inside you. And I know that's a lie, it's not, we don't have everything inside us, in fact, everything what the Bible says is that our hearts is deceitful and wicked, we're or slaves to the flesh, like all these different things. And like, for me, that still seems to be the most convincing to me, is like, even like nowadays when you hear like contemporary churches, a lot of their messages are humanistic. They're not coming from you're sinful, you're a slave to sin, or, that their messages are basically just like, oh, just look within you, don't get me wrong, as a Christian, Christ within us, he's good, and our, the state we're in, positionally in Christ, that's different. But sanctification is still a work, we still have reside in sin. And so, and just also irresistible grace, knowing that if I try to change myself, and that I couldn't, but when Christ put His grace on me, that I couldn't go back. Like I can't, like there's nothing that can make me. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I can't fall into sin. I do every day, probably horrible sins, but you can't make me go back to, how I was before, not caring, I'm convicted, and so yeah, I think that's the little story how I came to Calvinism. Some of the truths, of course, the sovereignty of God is a hard truth to swallow, maybe one of the hardest to swallow, when you start thinking about people going to hell, and I, some people have an idea of sovereignty that's not really sovereignty, that, oh, God knows because He saw what choice you're going to make. And I think a good way to look at it, a good analogy, was like, if you have this cross, and some people think that Calvinism says like, oh, there's people coming to the cross, but God is like saying, no, I didn't predestine you. But that's not the truth. In reality, everybody's running away from the cross. Everybody in the world is like, all of humanity starts in that position where they're fleeing from God. They're fleeing from Christ. They don't want God. They want everything else that their nature wants. Even in their mind, though, they think they might profess, but you don't. And God in His graciousness has said, no, I'm going to get you. Come here, you, come here. And He did that to me. And ultimately, that's the picture of grace, Like, if you're running that way, get your butt over here, you know what I mean? So, and that's how I look at that. That's how I look at the doctrines of grace,